From Montana's news leader, this is the MTN Noon News.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us on the Noon News this beautiful Friday. I'm Kelsey Marison. First this afternoon, access to healthcare in Montana is forever changed. Billings Clinic now boasts the state's first Level 1 trauma center. This the same day the hospital announced new details about its merger with Kalispell-based Logan Health. Officials from both hospitals say the announcements are perhaps the biggest developments in healthcare in Montana. As for the Level 1 trauma designation, hospital leaders say patients treated at a Level 1 center have a 25% greater chance of survival, and that distinction isn't easily earned. The hospital spent $30 million to meet 170 different requirements and pass a rigorous review from the American College of Surgeons. Officials say having a Level 1 center in Montana means fewer patients rush to hospitals and helicopters, and potentially more lives saved.
The time to get to the place where you're going to stay, to get the final care that you receive, is the most important thing. That's what gives you the best chance of survival if you're severely injured. So bringing that to Montana, cutting down that time will save lives.
As for Billings Clinic merger with Logan Health, that will take effect on September 1st. We're learning new details on an elaborate sober living home scheme in Arizona that targeted thousands of Native Americans. Fraudulent treatment centers lured a number of Montana tribal members to Arizona with promises of recovery. Victims were given free housing but no treatment. Those fake providers then allegedly billed for services not provided, up to $1,300 per person per day, collecting millions in Medicaid payments from the state. They would even supply dangerous drugs to keep bodies in beds so they could steal more money. Arizona is shutting false treatment centers down, leaving many with no place to go.
They're given drugs and alcohol. Sometimes they're beaten, sometimes they're raped. This is a new kind of trauma that they're going to experience on top of why they have trauma to begin with.
You're supposed to get 72 hours of detox. I went there and they knew I was high, yet still they didn't provide any detox. They literally told me just sleep it off. I know the opportunity to relapse is so much more prevalent now here. I'm almost scared to go home.
The organization Stolen People, Stolen Benefits has set up a GoFundMe to help victims get back on their feet. We've included a link to this in the story on our website. A heads up for boaters on Whitefish Lake. Officials are warning that the public ramps at Whitefish Lake State Park and Whitefish City Beach are approaching levels that are too shallow to launch or take out large boats. All boaters are advised to be careful when launching or taking out in low water conditions at public ramps. Landowners with large boats docked on Whitefish Lake are asked to monitor lake levels and consider taking out their boats. Severe drought conditions, earlier than normal spring runoffs, and hot, dry weather have created below average stream flows and lake levels across northwest Montana. Yesterday, Republican Congressman Brian Zinke hosted a roundtable in Gallatin Gateway. Special guests included former Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, former Attorney General Matt Whitaker, and former Navy SEAL and CEO of Bridger Aerospace Tim Sheehy, who is running for Senate. The discussions included the fentanyl crisis in Montana and securing borders. Zinke also discussed illegal immigration at the Mexican border and expressed his concern with how the Biden administration is handling the issue. It's important to be bear aware while enjoying the great outdoors, but now it appears we need to be otter observant as well. This week, 3 women were attacked and bitten by a group of otters while floating the Jefferson River near the Lewis and Clark Caverns. All 3 were injured, one victim so badly she had to be taken to the hospital via helicopter. Montana wildlife officials say the attack appears to be defensive in nature. Wild new video out of Helena shows a drunk driver using the Montana Capitol grounds as a racetrack. 36-year-old Christopher Yarnes was arrested for the stunt last weekend, but not before he caused over $6,000 in damage from behind the wheel of his Dodge Dakota. You can even see him in this video trying to drive up the steps of the Capitol. Police say he blew a .188, more than twice the legal limit. Yarnes is charged with 3 counts, including driving under the influence, criminal endangerment, and desecration of the Capitol. And that's a look at today's top stories.
Happy Friday, everybody. As we cruise on into the weekend, some areas going to see some heavy rainfall today. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But first, let's start off with what's going on across the U.S. today. Your headlines for the 48s. Across much of the south, extreme heat and humidity rocking on. The northeast, we have severe storms that will be possible. Southern plains and the northwest, that fire weather threat continues. And parts of the northern plains, heavy rain with flash flooding likely. You can see we've got 2 areas of low pressure working in tandem to bring a whole bunch of moisture to the area. And you can see where we have spots listed heavy rainfall. Who's going to get the heavy rain? How much could we get? We'll talk about that coming up.
Addressing lead levels in school drinking water has been a lengthy process across Montana. In Helena Public Schools, leaders say they completed their first round of remediation work about a year ago, and they're confident that it's made a big difference.
I had to start with the schools out in the valley because we had the most issues there. But once we moved into town, it was about picking the smaller schools and kind of learning the process rather than tackling the biggest schools. By the time we reached the middle school and high school level, we really knew what we were doing.
At C.R. Anderson Middle School, one area they focused on was the home economics classroom, where they knew there was a high chance students would be directly exposed to the water.
Cooking food, preparing food with the water, you know.
The district installed water filters on each faucet in the room. In a classroom lab, they instead put in signs, warning the water should be used only for laboratory use.
It took us some time to find the right label, and we ran it by the DEQ for approval and got them printed up.
The state updated rules on lead in school drinking water in 2020, attempting to reduce the long-term health impacts of early lead exposure in children. Montana DEQ says about 3/4 of school facilities statewide have finished sampling their water sources for lead. Of the tested fixtures, about 18% had somewhat elevated lead levels. They could still be used, but needed repairs, upgrades, or regular flushing. Another 8% with the highest lead concentrations had to be removed from service immediately. During this year's legislative session, lawmakers added $3.7 million to a major spending bill to provide grants to reimburse schools for their lead remediation efforts. DEQ is still finalizing the details of the grant program, but they hope it will remove some of the barriers to getting this needed work done.
Just emphasizing the schools that we have that funding. I know there might have been hesitation in the past because lead remediation can be expensive and schools have strapped budgets, but with this new funding, it should alleviate a lot of that.
The Biden administration also announced this week that Montana will receive $565,000 to address lead in schools. DEQ said they plan to direct that money towards sampling and use the additional state money for remediation. In Helena, Jonathan Amberian, MTN News.